Her husband introduced her at work as his assistant out of shame, but years after their divorce, she made him regret it. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. At 50, as I reflect on my life, I can hardly believe how I've managed to survive it all. For many years I thought I was just unlucky. No matter how much effort I put in, it seemed like life was determined to knock me down. Even when I reached 40, nothing seemed to go right. But as they say, life has a way of surprising us, and mine did too, though not without its share of hardships and heartbreaks. I was born as Laura Mitchell, the eldest child in a modest family. Unlike the stereotypical struggles of growing up in a wealthy family, my challenges came from growing up poor. My mother was worn down by her own failures and the constant pressure to make ends meet. She often took her frustrations out on me. It wasn't that I was her enemy, but in her eyes, I became a symbol of everything she had failed to achieve. Things worsened when my brother, James, was born. He quickly became the pride and joy of the family. While I faded into the background, James was seen as the future of our small family business, one that never really took off. My mother and father lavished attention on him, believing that he would one day carry on the family's name. Meanwhile, I was treated like a helping hand, someone to assist the family while James grew into the successful man they envisioned. The favoritism wasn't always obvious to me at first, but I felt it. James always received the best: new clothes, better food, and extra blankets in the cold winters while I settled for what was left. When it came time for school, he was sent to a respectable private academy, the kind of place my parents could barely afford. Meanwhile, I wasn't even allowed to dream about attending high school. They saw no value in educating me beyond what was necessary. I resented my family for the way they treated me. All I wanted was a chance to learn, to prove myself. I begged my father to let me continue my education, to at least attend high school. But he scoffed at the idea. "What's the point in wasting money on a girl's education?" he'd say. "You should be grateful you finished middle school. We need you here, not wasting time with books." His words cut deep, but I refused to give up. I knew that education was the only way out of the life they had planned for me. At 16, I took a job working at a local retail store, long hours on my feet to help support the family. But my real goal was to continue my studies. I studied secretly at night, using every spare moment to prepare for the equivalency exam that would allow me to get a high school diploma. It was an exhausting time, but it paid off. By the time I was 19, I had passed the exam. That small victory gave me the courage to leave home. I left my parents and James behind, determined to make a life on my own terms. I thought I had escaped the cycle of neglect and mistreatment, but I soon learned that life had other challenges in store for me. For 2 years, I worked low-paying jobs and lived in a tiny, run-down apartment in the city. It was far from glamorous, but for the first time in my life I had freedom. I was no longer under my parents' control, no longer forced into the role of the obedient daughter. I was independent, even if it meant living on the edge of poverty. Then I met Tom Hastings, the man who would become my husband. He was the son of a small business owner who ran a local cafe where I worked as a waitress. Tom was unlike anyone I had met before, kind, supportive, and always encouraging. He complimented me on my hard work, made me feel seen, and for the first time in my life I felt like someone genuinely valued me. We fell in love quickly. Before long, we were married in a quiet ceremony with no fanfare, no fancy dresses. Just the two of us signing papers and moving into my tiny apartment together. But soon after our marriage, trouble began to stir. Tom's mother, Marjorie Hastings, was furious when she found out we had married in secret. She came to me one day, her voice dripping with disdain. "How dare you marry my son without my approval?" she hissed. "Do you think I'll accept someone like you into our family? You're nothing but a gold digger." I was stunned. I hadn't seduced anyone, let alone tried to take advantage of Tom. We had fallen in love, and the decision to marry was mutual. But nothing I said could change Marjorie's mind. She refused to accept our marriage and, worse, demanded that I quit working at their cafe. "You won't be paid for the work you've done here," she sneered. "You've caused enough trouble for our family." It was an impossible situation. I had hoped that by leaving my family behind, I could build a better life, but it seemed like mistreatment was something I couldn't escape. Tom did his best to stand up to his mother, but her anger and resentment never faded. Things became even more complicated when I discovered that I was pregnant shortly after the wedding. I was thrilled at the idea of starting a family, but when we told Marjorie the news, her reaction was far from what I had hoped for. "Oh, how convenient," she said with a smirk. "I suppose this is how you plan to trap my son, by tying him down with a baby." No matter what I said, Marjorie refused to believe that the child was Tom's. She spread rumors around the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I had tricked her son into marrying me. It didn't matter how much Tom defended me, the damage was done. My pregnancy, already difficult, became even more stressful with the weight of her constant accusations. But I endured it. Had to. I loved Tom, and I wanted to build a good life for our child. Tom supported me as best he could, but we had little money, and his mother's interference made it hard for us to find peace. She forced me to continue working, even while pregnant, both at her cafe and at home. I wasn't just her daughter-in-law, I was her servant. Even after our daughter, Grace, was born, Marjorie's cruelty didn't relent. If anything, it worsened. She insisted that I return to work at the cafe shortly after giving birth, as if being a new mother didn't come with its own set of challenges. There were days when I would be exhausted beyond belief, taking care of a newborn and trying to manage the household work while also keeping up with my duties at the cafe. But in Marjorie's eyes, I was never doing enough. "You think you can slack off just because you've had a child," she would say. "You're lucky to be here. Women like you don't get second chances. Don't forget where you came from." Her words stung, but I bit my tongue. I convinced myself that as long as I could raise Grace in a loving environment, I could endure anything. Tom, for his part, tried to help. He worked long hours, but the tension between him and his mother was always simmering beneath the surface. As the years passed, however, the strain began to show. Tom and I were both stretched thin, me by Marjorie's relentless demands, and him by the pressures of trying to support our family financially. Slowly but surely, the love we once shared began to fade, buried under the weight of daily struggles and exhaustion. We had little time for each other, and when we did, the conversations were often short and strained. It wasn't long before Tom began spending more time away from home. He claimed it was for work, but I started to suspect there was something else going on. His late nights became more frequent, and when I questioned him about it, he grew defensive. "I'm doing this for us," he would say, dismissing my concerns. "Do you think I enjoy being out all night, dealing with clients?" But his words didn't reassure me. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was unraveling. Then one morning, I received a frantic call from Tom. "I left an important contract at home," he said, his voice filled with panic. "I need you to bring it to the office right away." I rushed to his workplace, not even bothering to put on a proper coat, just grabbing the contract and heading out the door. When I arrived, I was out of place, standing in the sleek modern office lobby with my worn-out clothes and tired face. As I handed the contract to the receptionist, one of Tom's colleagues approached him. "Is this your assistant?" the man asked, glancing at me. Without hesitation, Tom responded, "No, she's just helping out." The words stung like a slap in the face. Just helping out. After everything I had done for him, for our family, was that all I was to him now? I stood there, frozen, while Tom's colleagues chuckled and made small talk. He barely looked at me as he took the contract from my hands, turned back to his work, and left me standing in the lobby, humiliated. That evening, when he came home, I confronted him. "Why did you say that?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. "Why did you introduce me like that?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "What does it matter?" he replied coldly. "You embarrassed me showing up like that. Do you even care how you look? I'm a man, Laura. I need more than this." His words cut me deeply. For years I had sacrificed everything, my time, my energy, my happiness, to keep our family afloat. I had endured Marjorie's cruelty, worked long hours, and put my dreams on hold for the sake of our marriage. And now, all of that meant nothing to him. I was just an afterthought, a burden he had to tolerate. That night, as I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were swollen from crying, my skin dull and tired from the years of stress and neglect. How had I let myself fade so completely? How had I become someone who accepted being treated this way? A few weeks later, the situation came to a head. Tom came home late, reeking of alcohol. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. The next morning, without a hint of remorse, he told me he wanted a divorce. "I've been seeing someone else," he said matter-of-factly, as if he were talking about the weather. "She's pregnant, and I want her to move in here. You need to leave." I was stunned. After everything I had done for him, after years of standing by his side, he was abandoning me for another woman. I refused to leave. "This is my home too," I said, my voice trembling. "I won't just walk away." But he didn't care. His mother, as always, took his side. Marjorie showed up at the house, throwing my belongings out of the door with venomous glee. "You're the reason everything went wrong," she shouted. "You've held my son back for long enough. It's time for you to go." Grace walked into the chaos, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She saw the argument, saw my belongings scattered on the lawn, and ran to my side. "Mom, you can't let them do this," she said, her voice breaking. "You deserve better. Don't let them push you out." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I had spent years enduring mistreatment, thinking I was protecting Grace by keeping quiet. But now I realized that by staying silent, I was teaching her that it was okay to be treated like this. I couldn't allow that. "I'm not leaving until I get what I deserve," I said, standing my ground. "I want half of the house and child support for Grace." Tom laughed bitterly. "You think you'll get anything? You'll be lucky to walk away with the clothes on your back." "Then we'll fight for it," I replied, my voice stronger than I had expected. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." What followed was a bitter legal battle. Tom fought me every step of the way, but I refused to back down. I had given up too much to let him take everything. Eventually, after months of court appearances and harsh words, we reached a settlement. He transferred the money, and Grace and I moved out. But even though I had won, I felt hollow. The marriage I had once believed in was over, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my life. After the divorce, finding a job was harder than I anticipated. I had spent so many years focused on supporting Tom and raising Grace that my work experience was limited. Every job I applied for seemed out of reach, and the rejections piled up quickly. With Grace preparing for college, the pressure was mounting. I needed to provide for her, and fast. One day, while scanning the classifieds, I came across an ad for a housekeeping position. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something I could do. The pay was low, but at least it was steady. I applied and, within days, was hired. For the next 6 months, I worked as a housekeeper, cleaning homes for families across the city. It wasn't easy work, but I was good at it. Meticulous, fast, and reliable. Soon, I built a reputation for being one of the best workers at the agency. Then one day, I received an unexpected offer. "We have a client," the agency manager told me. "He's very particular, and he's rejected every housekeeper we've sent. But we think you could be the right fit. If you take this job, your pay will triple my current pay." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. With Grace heading off to college soon, I needed the extra money. I accepted the offer without hesitation, though I had no idea what kind of situation I was walking into. When I arrived at David Brooks' house, I was surprised to find it in perfect order. There was hardly anything to clean. The modern, minimalist design of his home made it look as though it had been kept spotless for years. I felt a wave of uncertainty. If there was nothing to clean, what was I supposed to do? I began creating work for myself. I would rewash curtains that didn't need washing, polish already shiny surfaces, and reorganize cabinets that were already meticulously arranged. I needed to justify my presence, so I started preparing meals, hoping it would make a difference. I didn't know what David liked to eat, so I kept it simple and left the food in the fridge. The next time I came to the house, I found a note on the refrigerator. "Thank you for the meal." It was a small gesture, but it lifted my spirits. For the first time in a long while, I felt appreciated for the work I was doing. I continued preparing meals and doing whatever I could to keep busy, though the house was always spotless. As the weeks went by, I found more notes after each visit. "The soup was delicious, thank you." The portions were a bit large, but everything was great. It became our way of communicating, and I started to feel a strange connection with David, even though we rarely spoke. One day something unexpected happened. When I arrived at the house, David was home, sitting on the couch. He looked pale and exhausted. "I'm not feeling well today," he said quietly. "You should probably go. I don't want to get you sick." I couldn't leave him like that. "You shouldn't be alone when you're sick," I insisted. "Let me make you some soup and pick up some medicine for you." He hesitated but eventually agreed. I made him a simple chicken soup and left it in the fridge, along with a note reminding him to take the medicine I had bought. The next day when I returned, I found a small gift waiting for me. A beautiful bouquet of flowers with a note that read, "Thank you for taking care of me." I was touched by the gesture. It was a kindness I hadn't experienced in years. From that moment on, our dynamic began to shift. Though we still communicated mostly through notes, there was a warmth in his words that hadn't been there before. I looked forward to my days at his house, knowing that I was appreciated in ways that went beyond just doing a job. One evening, as I was preparing to leave, David asked me an unexpected question. "Do you ever eat with anyone?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I paused, unsure how to respond. "I usually eat with Grace," I said. "Why do you ask?" He looked down at his hands, as if embarrassed. "I eat alone most of the time," he admitted. "And no matter how good the food is, it just doesn't taste the same when you're eating by yourself." His honesty took me by surprise. For the first time, I saw a vulnerability in him that I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just a distant, wealthy client. He was a person who, like me, was lonely. "If you'd like," I offered cautiously, "I could stay and have dinner with you tonight. It's better than eating alone, right?" His face softened in relief. "I'd like that," he said. That evening we shared our first meal together. At first, it felt strange. After all, I had never eaten with a client before. But as we talked, the awkwardness melted away. David told me about his life, how he had grown up taking care of his mother after his father left. He had never married, mostly because the women he met seemed more interested in his money than in him. I shared some of my own story. My divorce, the years I had spent raising Grace on my own, and the struggles I had faced along the way. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Our dinners became a regular occurrence after that. With each passing week, our connection deepened. What had started as a professional relationship slowly evolved into something more. David wasn't just my employer anymore. He had become a friend, someone I could trust. One evening, after we had finished dinner, David looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "I know this might sound forward," he began, his voice steady but soft, "but would you consider having dinner with me, as more than just a housekeeper?" I blinked, surprised by the question. I hadn't allowed myself to think of our relationship in those terms. I had been so focused on maintaining professionalism that I hadn't considered the possibility of something deeper. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been through a lot, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of relationship." David nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I don't want to pressure you," he said gently. "But I care about you, Laura. And I just wanted you to know that." Over the next few months, David's kindness and patience slowly won me over. He wasn't like Tom. He didn't take me for granted or expect me to make sacrifices for him. He respected me as a person, and for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe again. Eventually, I agreed to take the next step with David, and we became a couple. Grace, who had met David a few times by then, was supportive. "Mom, he's good for you," she said one evening. "I can tell." David and I took things slow, building our relationship on trust and understanding. When he asked me to marry him months later, I was ready. We held a small, intimate wedding with only our closest friends and family. As I stood beside David, exchanging vows, I knew that I had finally found the happiness I had long been searching for. Looking back now, I realized that life's struggles had brought me to this place. And in the end, it wasn't luck that changed my life. It was my resilience and willingness to keep moving forward. With David by my side and Grace flourishing, I finally felt whole. And for that, I am deeply grateful. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.